So welcome everyone to our session on immigration education and equity-focused governance. My name is Beth Finch. I'm the founder of CharterSource, which is an advisory to charter schools in board governance. We provide board training, governance assessments, coaching, and our board management system, which is essentially a one sign-in experience for everything your board needs, from a sample policy library to the automation of your board processes. So I have the pleasure of introducing our guest experts today. We are so thrilled to partner with Global Language Connections. Priya Moriaka has had vast marketing management experience with some of our local favorite brands, from General Mills to Caribou to Schwan Food Company. She also received her undergrad from the University of Minnesota and a master's from the University of Michigan. We also just want to highlight and appreciate her service as a board member for the Harvest Network, the best academy here in Minneapolis. And she is Chief Operation Officer of Global Language Connections. So welcome, Priya. Also have Kaji Ali, and she is the CEO and founder of Global Language Connections. And I think she articulates her mission well, is to create connections between immigrant communities and established business by eliminating barriers and creating winning solutions for all constituents. She attended the University of Minnesota, and she has also served as, or serves as, a board member of AEON and Minneapolis Chamber of Commerce. The accolades for her work are impressive, from Young American Leaders cohort at Harvard to the Achievement Award for the Minnesota International Leadership Institute, to the 2017 Women in Business from Minneapolis-St. Paul Business Journal, and acknowledgement of her work by the City of Minneapolis, our governor, and Comunidades for providing vital services for minorities. So welcome, both of you. We are so thrilled to have you join us and partner in this work. We believe very strongly that we are simply the facilitators and the conveners. We really rely on our local community experts and leaders and help guide us through this work. So thank you again, Priya and Kajia, for being with us today.
Well, thank you, Beth, for that wonderful and warm introduction. And thank you to everyone who's attending and tuned in for this opportunity to share with you something our organization is very passionate about. As Beth mentioned, we are a language and cultural services company. And what sets us apart in the market is our approach leads to risk mitigation, increased client loyalty, attraction, and productivity. And we deliver that through a lens of creating cultural understanding. We really believe that language and culture go hand in hand, and when those two are paired together, there's stronger results. So what this looks like from an educational standpoint is when schools have large foreign-born populations, we can help reduce misunderstandings, increase parent and student participation, and have stronger academic results, and increase school of choice, because the school has created a reputation and results for better serving the communities that they're working with. So today we'll talk a little bit about the diversity of foreign-born residents and why it's important to gain deeper insights on how to better serve these students and their parents for charter schools with high populations in these communities. So just kind of understanding a little bit about the diversity within the foreign-born population, taking kind of a step to look at the whole United States. And this may be some things that you guys are familiar with, so apologize if that is. But the foreign-born population is really driving the growth in the US. And the diversity from where they're coming from is broad. I think we tend to kind of think of a top few, but they're coming from all over, including, you know, some of the countries that are here. And interesting with the current administration's policies, while the rate has declined, they are driving people coming into the country. They are driving growth through their children and having children. And so from an educational standpoint, it's really important that we're doing what we can and helping support our educators like you so that they can deliver the best education to these children, because it's imperative to our future success. So just kind of setting the stage, I think we often hear about immigrants, and that's kind of the group we lump everybody into, but to really help dissect a little bit of that, kind of the global term or the overarching term would be foreign born. And then within that, there are immigrants and then there are non-immigrants, as you can see, based on these various categorizations. But the common thread is their children are all going to schools in the US. So, just starting to put the lens on from where their parents might be coming from, even within a community or across the communities, these are some things that could be in their minds as they're sending their children to school. Okay. So Minnesota is a really interesting case study. We are an incredibly diverse community within a smaller portion of the population that has changed, quite dramatically in the past, 20, 30 years. So while only 9% of the state's residents, there's different entry statuses that people come through, as you saw from the last slide. There's 100 languages. Sometimes within a community, there can be multiple languages. A lot of the students are speaking different languages at home. And most of the, a large portion of the parents are immigrants or foreign born. So how to build success with these communities in education? A bright spot is they all highly value education. But the question is, how do we connect with them when juggling these multiple factors within and across communities, which are critical to understanding how to help children succeed?
So as we look at the super diverse community within these immigrant communities from different countries, there is a huge diversity within the immigrant community. Just an example, I'm from Somalia, right? So you might have many different students from Somalia, but those students, there's a huge diversity within those groups themselves, depending on what region they come from, depending on what the background education for their parents were, depending on how long they were either in a displacement or a refugee camp before they come to the US. Their educational level of understanding the culture might vary. So a lot of times when we have teachers or educators, they all paint the same brush with all the same groups, right? All Hmong are from this, and then so it's really, really important to understand the different norms, because we have a culture within a culture, right? We have a culture in our community, and then we have a culture in our homes, and culture can vary because the way my mom did things would be very different the way I do things. So culture is just similar to that. So it's important that we understand the different groups and also different dialect and different educational levels and the different norms. Because as we meet some educators at times, they say, well, recently we were told, a teacher was told by a parent to beat up the child if they don't follow the rules. I mean, that is the norm in some cultures, but she thought there was an abuse happening in the household. Yeah. And to her, that was like shocking. But coming from East Africa, Somalia, that's part of the culture and the norm. Teachers are considered like parents, and they have, full access to however they want to discipline that child. So those are the kind of things I think it's important that we understand as we try to educate the multiple different communities within communities.
And then one area that illustrates this, and this has been something that's been going on in the Minnesota legislature, and this, it just takes one ethnic group or racial group, and really this group particularly tends to skew high in performance when looked at an aggregated level. But the push for an advocacy to disaggregate the data across ethnic and racial groups is exactly what Khadija said, and here is demonstrated within the Asian community. here you can see, the multiple different communities that are represented by that bucket. And then when you layer on, where are they coming from? What's their parents' background? What entry status do they come in those various filters, you start to see that different communities have different needs within it. And the reason they're advocating for this is because when it's lumped together, funding and vital resources go away or aren't allocated, maybe not in the best manner. And this applies to all of the ethnic groups, because even, when the box is Black, you have Black Americans born here, Africans such as Khadija and other communities that have come here, and their experiences and needs are vastly different. As Khadija mentions, bias is something that, when she talked about we have, when she talked about the example with the student whose parent said, you could beat up my child, then, in America, it's like, oh my gosh, it's, we instinctively think child abuse. Whereas, in other countries, that's an okay thing. And so we bring both those implicit and explicit biases. And some examples here that we hear when we work with our clients are, all Asians are smart. They kind of have that perspective, and they all are, but are they needs being met if they're not maybe speaking up, if they're not understanding? And, the one about not understanding can be, in some cultures, you're taught not to question, not to ask questions. And so that goes both also for the parent side too, not just the students.
Yes, and I know that when we work with schools, they'll say, well, the student never asks questions. Well, the parents never come to school, and or I call and no one is responding, because the thing is, culturally, a lot of these immigrant groups come from countries where the teachers really have had and the educators had a lot of power, so that they drove the agenda, and that you don't just question, you don't speak up, you don't say anything, because that means you're questioning your teacher. So it's really important that you understand and you take the time to work with that family individually, and not to think, well, they don't ask questions, so therefore they're good to go. And especially we've seen this with a lot of the Hmong community. They're not, a lot of the families say we're not being pushed, we're not being asked, because teachers just assume a lot of things, and by the time we realize the child is not learning, or there's an issue, or they're really behind, it'll be mid-year or at the end of the year. So, and the ways to communicate also vary. So here in America, we use a lot of emails. We know that a lot of these immigrant families don't really use emails, or if they even have an email, they don't open their emails. So the teacher will say, well, I send an email. So making sure that we understand the level of education, or sometimes the parent might feel like, well, I'm not a good writer, so they don't feel comfortable writing you back. So just thinking about all of those different dynamics that contribute to maybe children lagging or not understanding, is really critical to their success.
Khadija, I work with an individual that works with the Literacy Council, and a lot of the issues that Ebion talks about is the homework gap and the difficulty with assistance with homework. I'm just curious what you would comment on that as well.
Yes, and because I think I know Ebion, and they do such a great job. But the thing is, with homework, a lot of times kids are being sent to all of this homework, which they themselves might not understand, and the parents at home might not speak the language, or might not really understand the homework. But that does not mean they're not really being supportive. So making sure that kids, and a lot of times kids will not tell the parents. Like, case in point, myself, when I came to this country, I didn't share a lot of things with my mom, when I came home from school, because I myself was so new to the country and didn't understand the language. So therefore I just kept, all of my homework, and the teachers will say, where's your homework? And the thing is, I think it's really important that we have language access, because at the end of the day, if you can communicate with the parents, then they're able to, they really really, really love education and they want their children to be educated. But sometimes if they don't understand it, it's really hard for them to understand where the child is at. So having access for language services or support system in your school, it's really, really important. In a lot of schools, what they do have after school, they do have after school homework programs. So making sure the parents are aware of that, and then they're getting things in their own language. It's really, really critical. And sometimes even translating the report, the report card to the parents, it's really, really critical because a lot of times if a kid's not doing well, they don't really, because they're the ones who are going to interpret and translate to their parents. So they're not going to interpret to their parents that they're failing. That's obviously something I did not do. But, it's really, really like a lot of times we have parents calling me saying, I didn't realize my child was behind, this long or this much. So creating environment where you have a really good relationship with the parents and making sure that they understand as a teacher what your expectations are or educator or the resource that the school have. And another thing with immigrant communities, once they build a trust with this particular school, they will all gravitate because it's really important to have that level of trust, because when they know that you're helping their child, they're going to make sure that, they tell their friends, and we know schools that now have waiting lists because of just the word of mouth, or because one family or two families really lack how they're being treated. So having, card reports in language that the parents understand, it's critical and crucial. And then making sure that you have after school programs available to these children. And now with, we live in a different time with Zoom, a lot of these parents might not even have a computer or might not even know how to operate one. So just making sure that each school and, creates resource for them, it's really crucial to the success of these kids.
On this bias slide, I've heard a lot of these things, and I think these inherent biases come up a lot in board meetings as well as in the culture of the schools. And I think most of the time people don't intend them, don't even stop to think about what is, really coming off as a bias. And I do think it is a lot of work to work at eliminating that bias, but when done in the intentional ways that were discussed here so far, you really do start to feel the community build with those parents when you're working specifically by making sure that they all have access to interpreters, that you're speaking directly to the parents and not just through the parents, through the student. So I just want to shout, one of the big practical things that I think boards can make sure that they're supporting in terms of funding and decision-making and policies is that the students are not used as interpreters. And that goes in a lot of cases. Sometimes it's not a language barrier. Sometimes it's a cultural barrier. And there's still sometimes the school staff tend to want to speak through the student when they're getting frustrated. They can't get hold of the parents. And as a school leader, I would usually ask, did you try email? Did you try text? Did you try Facebook message? All sorts of different ways. Be persistent, because even after that persistence, you'll find that it pays off that you actually made contact with that parent and spoke directly about the kids. So the cultural barriers are not easy to work with, but very rewarding once you've worked through and persisted through all the barriers.
And absolutely, and it's a win-win for everyone, because once as an educator, you really understand, because you also get frustrated, right? Because you're like trying to do all this work, but it's not being received. So when we work with educators and families and they kind of come to the same aha moment, it's really rewarding. And then a lot of, like you said, it all comes down to funding and access. And if teachers, educators don't have that access, it's really hard for them to do the actual work that they need. And I can tell you that when we get calls, it's usually when things are really escalating and children are either behind, and then teachers have been using the child as the mediator and the interpreter. And obviously a child who's in trouble will not say, Mom, by the way, I'm behind, So it's really important that, and once schools get it, there are some schools we work with who really get it, take the time to study these things, take the time to really understand these cultures, and they just find so much success. And it's not something that you need to repeat, once you really understand and you build that trust. And another thing we're not really talking about much is special education is also a huge issue for the immigrant community, and the way it's delivered from the educator side. When a child, two siblings, one of them's diagnosed with special ed and one's not, a lot of parents don't really understand that. So some of the work we've done with a lot of the public schools or charter schools in town is making them understand how to deliver that. And because teachers will literally, families will literally like switch the child to another school thinking they'll make a difference. And then the same issue is going to come up again because they have a learning disability, and that cannot just go away on its own. So just understanding culturally how to like navigate those little things that can make a huge difference are very, very critical.
So just, hopefully this information, was helpful, familiar, gave you some insights, and thinking about how to best meet the needs of your schools that you're working with high foreign-born populations. Schools to help drive success, as we've talked about. And so, I think the key takeaways are, working with a strategic partner to help create that access, both in traditional and non-traditional ways. As Khadija mentioned, not everybody might have access to certain electronic things. Now we're in the Zoom world, so that's a whole different story. But sometimes communication through, different channels, through like a community partner like us that can help, along with the Zoom meetings, the in-person, the over the phone, and then also working to create an understanding of the various communities you serve, and having someone help navigate that for you. I think I didn't catch his name, but they mentioned that when they see this being done to remove some of those biases and develop understanding, the results really do follow very quickly and are very successful. So
one of the things in this COVID environment that I know a lot of schools have been working on and worried about, frankly, is around student recruitment. And I think the thread that you've talked about that was very clear is that relationship building, which now is more difficult, right, in this environment that we've been in now for 6 months. Do you have any, especially when technology is a barrier to developing relationships, they can't come on site, families can't be at the school site. Are there any strategies or anything that you can help school leaders and board members understand that might help in that situation?
Kind of volunteering for them to sort of help them sort of with recruitment. And one of the things we've done is that because of the Zoom world and what had happened with COVID-19, some kids might be behind. So some schools are offering preparation before school starts programs. It's not a summer, but it's like, programs that help them sort of prepare for the next school year that's coming up. Because either, if kids were behind end of last year, if some of them were sick, or, families didn't have technology, we're sort of telling them, come and this is a place for you to get help. And we're using social media community platforms.
So some social media is a good strategy.
Especially community on social media news places, and just talking about the work that's being done, why it's important, and just kind of talking about your agenda and how you support this type of communities is really, really important. Because so immigrant communities are also very oral society, so everything's through mouth. Like unfortunately they do read, but I don't want to say they don't read, but a lot of their information circulates through word of mouth. So it's crucial that you have, you're putting your messages out there. this is who we are, this is what we do, this is, who our students are, this is who our educators are, this is what we're planning to do. Kind of having also, it's like a contingency plan, having like, if, schools open up, this is what we're ready to do. If schools don't open up, this is what we're ready to do. Sort of like marketing yourself in a way, without looking like you're marketing, but also, talking about, sometimes it's creating that awareness of who the schools are, what they do, and what resource they have available to underserved communities and people who, the parents might not speak English.
Well, that's helpful. I know Julie mentioned she's a teacher at Aurora, and she mentioned the, teaching kindergarten. If anyone has ever taught that grade level, you can imagine how much fun she's having with those littles. As I understand, the K-5 sector in itself is the most challenging to do from a distance learning perspective. So Julie was mentioning before that building a relationship is key, and how to do that with that age level and parents. It just seems like it just is tenfold complicated in the certain situation that we're at.
Absolutely, and some of the parents are also complaining because, like you said, they have anyone less than, I think, under third grade, they have to physically be there, with them, which is really difficult when they have 2 or 3 or 4 kids. So I don't know if there's a way to have, I don't know how that could be, I don't know how we could support those parents. What would the support system look like? Because we have school that I work with, and a lot of the young, parents with young other kids, was extremely overwhelming for them, really overwhelming, because they have to be physically there with that child, and and hopefully we're not going to stay in this period of our time, but I don't know. I think schools will be important to think a little bit maybe outside the box, how to maybe. And if that parents even have language barriers, even, extra work for them. So I don't know what resource the schools will have to be supportive in households like that. But I think that's also another thing that I heard a lot of complaining from parents, especially.
Beth, this is Karen. I guess I have a little bit of a question for those out there in the field. When talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, it seems that looking at it through the lens of governance, there's a lot of focus on making sure that the boards represent the diversity of their populations. And it certainly seems like at a time like this, that would be really helpful if the board members could always be looking at budgets and things like that through the lens of, voices that aren't always part of that conversation, mission statements and all the other things that boards look at. Are there any tips or ideas for how to recruit diversity onto the board, and how to find good candidates for the board who might be able to be that voice?
I think it's really important to look at the board composition as well as the engagement. And that's something we do because we are part of the immigrant community, but we can definitely making sure, I don't know how many schools and who is, how does your employment, I don't know, employees demographics look like? What type of staff do you have? If you have community liaisons, they could be a great resource in terms of like telling you who's out there. We could also help, obviously, recruit if we need. We have access to a lot of amazing different groups. The board, I serve the Minneapolis Foundation Board right now, and we're going through the same thing, making sure that, the conversation of the board is with enough diversity, and as well as the engagement. How are we engaging with asking all these questions? And I think it's really, really important that you have people who are from the communities you serve, the majority of your students, making sure you have at least some community liaisons, TAs. Those people can definitely help because they will have a lot of knowledge on who's in the community. And there's a lot of educators, actually, I'm finding out in the Somali community in particular recently. I was in a couple of meetings. So yeah, there are ways to definitely to recruit, but it has to be intentional and you know, absolutely, it's really crucial because it really helps the trust and deepen that, trust you will have with those community that you work with.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Karen, that is top of mind for literally every board I work with. It is an issue, and it's such an important piece to have that voice at the table. And that's part of the reason why I asked the question, do you have a strategic plan around DEI? And I think, Sarah, you mentioned your school district has had an equity in the forefront of our professional development plan goals for a number of years, which is excellent. And I think from a board level, that's what we would really like to bubble up in terms of really prioritizing. Because we don't have enough voices at the board level, I think what's even more important to really be intentional about training generative type discussions at a board level, setting a board calendar, driving a strategic plan just around DEI.
Question here asking this is coming from Wendy, that they have been getting more West African families attending their school in Crystal, and the language barrier does seem to be an issue for reaching out to parents. So in addition to getting communications out in their language, what might be some other early steps that the school could take to try to help welcome these families in the most welcoming way?
I think having orientations in their language, having, either if you have any employees from that community working at the schools, or hire an interpreting agency to come and do the orientations in their language, it's very crucial. And just explaining to them what the importance of them being engaged. And the Liberian community, we've worked with them a lot in the past, and that issue has come up a lot, where a lot of them, the numbers might not even work. That's what one school told us in the past. We called the parent and the number was disconnected. So there's a huge, I think, disconnect, because a lot of these parents are working 2 to 3 jobs. Some of them are really raising a lot of kids, and might not be able to focus on this one child that maybe you're teaching. So it's really important to set the stage early on and to talk about the goal, and to talk about how important it is for you to have access to them, because otherwise it's really hard to engage this child by themselves. And children themselves are going through different, they have to be one person at school, and then they have to be another person at home. That is also another huge issue that a lot of teachers and parents we work with in the past. So we work with the teachers trying to still help the child to have their privacy at school, because there are certain things that norm in our cultures that if you bring it up to maybe an immigrant parent, to them it makes the child seem like they're betraying their culture. So then it puts the child in a really big trouble. So the child stops sharing things with their parents at home, and then they start sharing things with you at school. So it's a double-edged sword. So how do we balance, depending on the grade you teach, especially that 8th grade, 7th grade, it's a really crucial time. And a lot of kids have an identity issues, and they want to be more American, but then they're expected to be a certain culture at home. And so kind of setting the stage early on, saying, listen, we want this child to succeed. These are my expectations. How would I communicate with you? But also having community person working for the schools is really critical. Really. I mean, they have ways to getting through these people. They have ways, they'll stop by their home, and they're related, because there's so many ways. It's so they have their little tricks So making sure that you have representation too, because these kids also, they do respect their teachers, but they're also more afraid of the person who's from the community. So having someone in there actually is good for behaviors and other things.
And I think too, that kind of constant presence and supporting that person with, you know, developing insights and understandings around what is that community that's kind of increasing or active in your schools? What are their education levels? What's the educational system that they're coming from? What are the traditional ways that, as you mentioned, teachers are viewed by the community? Things like that. Then do two things. One, you allow the person who you have in your school from that community to be able to kind of do the work and not burden them with increased work of giving you all these insights, because sometimes when you are those representatives, it can be incremental and very, you know, a lonely position to be in and taxing if you're doing kind of everything. So if you bring in a partner who can help you understand some of these kind of key top line things, and they can also help work with you to create those strategies, additional strategies that help bridge that differences between the backgrounds that you're serving and kind of the American educational system, because they are so different and they vary then within a community what they might have had access to too.
I will tell you my own personal experience. I came to this country when I was about 14 and a half. And I started ninth grade not speaking a word of English. And my mom had 6 other kids that were younger than me. So I was the least of her problems. And, and the teachers were not very supportive because they really didn't know how to support me. But there was one Somali elder lady that worked there that was really crucial to who I am today. Her name was Amina. She was highly educated, brilliant woman. And she had a way of talking to us, understanding what our issues were, and kind of relating that back to the teachers. Because I had a teacher who one time told me, I didn't need to do my homework, it's okay. I'm new to this country. And I remember she said, and I told my mom said, that is not acceptable. I don't care if you have to learn English overnight, you gotta do your homework. And I didn't know what to do because I didn't know how to do it. And I felt like the teachers were battering me and really not understanding, and I almost didn't want to come to school. But this lady had a way of sitting down with all the kids, she just talked to us, we go to her office when we had issues. She kind of became like the mom to every Somali kid in that school. So I think, and a lot of those kids, some of them right now today are actually, one of my good friends was just he's a cardiologist, Mayo trained, one of my classmates. And I remember him having huge issues with school, not being able to understand anything. And because Amina was there, she was able to connect the dots. She was able to talk to us in a way that we felt, supported as kids. Because at that time too, you think you know it all. You're a teenager and you're like, you don't want to listen to anyone. So whether you speak English or not, you're still a teenager. You got the teenage issues. So I think having that support, where Amina was just that person that was the teachers went to her, we went to her, and she was just very genuinely a good person who really wanted to see all of us succeed. And I really think she made a huge difference in that school. And that school up to today is, every Somali kid in Sendeva that I met here went through that school. So it kind of became a school of choice for the community because of her, that one person. It's because it's really important that we elevate everyone's voice, and that even, teenagers, want to be heard and want to be valued, and maybe they don't know culturally how to express that between the different cultures, and you're sort of like in the middle of a road, literally, and you just don't know which way to go at times.
So I think sometimes we don't know what we don't know until we've done a lot of introspection. And one of the thoughts I would have as I read through some of the comments about what the plans are for DEI in the schools, I didn't see anything explicitly talking about how the board members will be included. And I think it's something to think about and to munch on as you move forward into the process of considering DEI in your schools. It's oftentimes starts at the top. Are the decision makers who are making decisions about budgeting and policies and governance and the culture they have on that board, are they as in tune to the community and the DEI plan and strategic plan that's happening throughout the school community on a day-to-day basis? And so I think that the introspective question I would leave you with today would be, how is the board planning to be engaged in that DEI strategy? Or how is the school planning on including the board? And I'm not going to say any more about that, just to leave that question on the table, because Beth Finch is going to give you some ideas on how you might continue to work with our guest speakers today in a way that helps your board members think through their approach. Are they listening to all the voices, hearing all the voices, valuing all the voices of the community that the school serves?
Thank you for that, Karen. I think that's an excellent point. And we feel fortunate to partner with Global Language Connections to help board members understand, like Karen said, more about our community. And of course, understanding more about the students and the families we serve in our buildings every day is paramount. And frankly, I think this is an aspect that most charter schools do really well, is connecting with their families and students. So to Karen's point, what is the board's role in understanding how our families and students of color experience our school community? We're responsible as board members for the long-term sustainability of the school. If we're losing students because we're not serving our students properly, that's an issue at a board level, right? So we kind of laid out some of these guiding questions that you could share with your board. You can share during a board meeting, or maybe have some conversations with your school leader to kind of start thinking about this for those of you who have not done any kind of DEI work at a board level, which honestly, I've been on boards for 20 years. I think I've had very little of it. And so we as an organization, CharterSource, feel very strongly about partnering with local experts and national experts to really dig into this work and provide boards here in Minnesota with the tools that they need to really explore this. So for example, what learning conditions, just as a question, have we created that either inhibit or promote student success, right? So without micromanaging, what do we know about our curriculum content and our hiring and development practices using an equity lens, right? So a very inexpensive suggestion that came from Dr. John King, who is the former Ed Secretary for Obama and Managing Director of Uncommon Schools in Boston, shared a simple, kind of inexpensive tactic. I'm sure a lot of schools have already done this work, but just as simple, conducting an inventory of your children's books. How many are written by authors of color or share content about history of our Black and brown populations? Simple piece, but really start to map out kind of a strategy overall, and again, with both your board and operationally. Or perhaps your board will consider adding key metrics on your monthly board dashboard, disaggregating data around how your children of color perform versus your white students, and or against local comparable schools. I'm sure you're already tracking this, but making it a monthly part of your dashboard and start plugging in different key metrics around DEI elements to make sure that it is always part of the conversation. Or maybe you add key takeaways from your family survey. We just talked about how important it is to engage the community. Are you disaggregating that information to better understand the student and family experience? Again, through an equity lens. Their contacts here. If you have any questions, reach out to them, reach out to us. Thank you again, Kajia and Priya, we are grateful that you are doing this work. And most importantly, to all you who serve on boards, thank you for serving our Minnesota kids. So
Yeah, thank you so much, Beth, for the opportunity. And thank you guys for taking the time to connect with us.
Thank you.
you're welcome. Have a great day, everybody.